Oh, yeah, I noticed. So this is the logo of Uppsala University, where I'm doing research at the moment. And I found that logo interesting because I'm going to start. So this talk is going to be, a sort of proposal to work all together on the ontological aspect of possibility. And so the question of ontology could be, what's the hidden universal? What's the hidden absolute behind any discourse, right? And so I did a little bit of research, and if you look closely at the Uppsala University logo, you see that there is the tetragrammaton Yahweh, which can be translated, is often translated as the absolute that brings being into existence. So I find it interesting, and I think that we could wonder and ask ourselves, so what's the absolute that is hidden behind our discourse of the possible? And so we were talking a little bit about the philosophies of becoming, and so in my view, it would be interesting, and we will see that this could be interesting also for ethical and pragmatic and caring reasons. I should mention here that I'm not only a researcher, but I'm also a philosophical counselor, which means that once or one afternoon or two afternoons a week, I receive people and we have a dialogue about the meaning of their life, not looking for diagnosis, but rather, wondering about this strange experience that we're having on this planet. So for me, the possible is the very ground of being. It's condition of existence. And I'm part of those who believe that the ultimate real is a creative field of absolute possibility. I call it Creel, very simply from creative real, but as we were talking before in our breakout room, this has different names in different cultures. Tao, for example, or Dao in the Chinese culture. So for me, that's a non-anthropocentric ground, and that echoes the conversation we had on Monday about perhaps not, anthropomorphizing too much the possible. So it's a kingdom without king. And I just made that metaphor of kingdom because I had this random picture of the Uppsala castle, that was coming on the slide. So I thought, okay, let's keep the picture, even though I didn't choose it. Okay, so we're dealing with processes of actualization from Creel to real, and the universe can be seen as a possibilization furnace. And for practical matters or matters of care, I often distinguish between three forms of relationship to the world, three forms of understanding: the analytic, and we were talking about that previously, right? The analytic, the dialectic, and the crealectic, if there's any form of articulation that could be in relationship with that creal source. And so those three are, of course, necessary, or at least if they are balanced, they can bring interesting perspectives to each other. The first one tends to deal with pragmatic separation, the division of the unknown into known parts. But then the problem is that we find it very hard to put these parts together to create a living entity. The second one often deals with dynamic tension, and we know that in the tradition there are two aspects of dialectic. The one that simply means dialogic, in a tension towards truth with the Greek philosophical dialogue, but also the Hegelian grandiose version of this constant conflict between different perspectives that are antagonistic and that need to create some sort of a sursumption, which is perhaps a sophisticated name for sometimes for a compromise. And then I will speak about crealectics as a eudynamic, so from the idea of good possibility, dynamia, the Greek word for possible, for potential. I enter into more detail about that in the paper that should be very soon published, which is called Crealectic Intelligence to Our Common Encyclopedia of the Possible. And in that paper, I used the analogy of Hansel and Gretel. And I compare, I won't enter into details here. You have the reference of the paper above, but I compare the first strategy, the white pebbles, to the analytic strategy. I compare the strategy of the breadcrumbs to dialectics, for the reason, very short, that, well, these breadcrumbs have different value for the children and for the birds. And there's sort of a dialectic conflict there, and the birds win. It is food rather than a way to go back home. And the problem with these two strategies, the strategy of the pebbles and the breadcrumbs, is that and the first one works, is that the best that they can do is that they bring us home. But that doesn't really solve the problem, because they go back to their misery and to their parents who treat them badly, etc. So the crealectic strategy is a bit the peak liminal space we were talking about. Is, well, instead of trying to go back simply to our default mode, which might seem the mode of security, but which in fact is the problematic mode, we bravely enter into the forest. And of course, the gingerbread house for me symbolizes that Creole, that abundance of infinite or absolute possibility. But then you all know the story is that there are a few steps that must be taken, and the witch in the house needs to be, which is probably a certain ambiguous relationship that we all have with power, needs to be overcome, etc. So for me, the possible is the given. It's really the air in the multiple balloons of reality, and so it's there. It's a necessity. We don't really have so much to advocate for it, because it always finds its ways, despite the fact that the access to the possible may be, and of course is often, hindered by analytic regimens, protocols, and norms. We were talking about standards before. The last encounter I had with this experiences, which we all face every day, is when the head of my department the other day told me, we in the humanities, we should just be very humble and sneak into some scientific project because we are just not mattering much. And I found that really sad to have that vision of humanities, which is certainly not mine. So even if the possible is our given, nevertheless, because precisely of this normativity and regimes of standardization, well, there's work to be done. And so I think advocating a right to the possible for all beings could be an interesting direction. This is connected to what phenomenology and design analyze, which is a sort of a therapy based on existentialism, called possibilization. And so that leads from, so that was the little very quick path from self-possibility to from absolute possibility to self-possibility, which designates any being's relationship with the natural field of possibility. And I have that in practice when I work with my patients. I didn't used to call them patients, but in fact now I call them patients because it has to do with being patient also, with slow growth. But I often talk about, okay, reconnecting with our eudaimia, our equilibrium of good possibility, both physical, psychological, and cosmological. It's not so much about possibilities given to a self, but rather the possibility of emergence of self as meaning and spirit out of a ground of multiplicity. So this is just a note to say that perhaps I don't want this concept of self-possibility to be understood in, of course, this individualistic way and self-obsessed way. So what is, and I'm almost finished here, what is crealectic intelligence for those who will not have the time to read the entire paper? Well, I could say that it's a communion of goodwill such that it allows for a shared experience of being in terms of actualization or non-actualization of our common field of Creel, because of course, and I think Vlad mentioned that point, the philosophy of the possible doesn't mean that we should actualize everything. Sometimes it's about rather not doing things. And so, yes, so one example of application is care and what I call philosophical health. And I do think our planet needs not only psychological health, not only physical health, which have become both very normative, but philosophical health. And I think that's it. That was the end of my